So we're gonna do a quick refresher. We're gonna do a quick refresher and a quick jab at the people that said that the Holocaust has actually started in 1942. So a quick refresher. In 1940, in the occupied Warsaw, a special section of the city was sort of isolated from the rest of Warsaw, the capital of Poland. That special zone in the city was called the Jewish Ghetto. The Jewish Ghetto was isolated from the rest of the city by a wall. And within those walls lived Jewish people who were then also forced to wear an armband with a star to sort of show that they were Jewish, in addition to being forced into the ghetto. There was actually an official reason why the Germans said that Jewish people needed to be crammed into the ghetto. The official reason was that the Jewish people spread disease and that the isolation's purpose was to save Polish people from catching the disease. It was to separate the healthy from the unhealthy in a quarantine of sorts. That was the official reason of trapping people within the walls. Within the walls, by the way, for which the Jewish community had to pay with its own money, and I'm pretty sure build as well. It was not a big area. Let us look at it. The Jewish ghetto map. This was it. You can see it on here. This purple line would be basically representing the wall of the ghetto. You can see it has the Jewish cemetery here. The Jewish cemetery, which of course still stands, and one can go visit it in Warsaw. It's like a very historical cemetery. You must remember, because I think this is another thing that people do not take into perspective when discussing the Jewish life in Poland before World War II. Most estimations say that before World War II, 1/3 of the Polish capital of Warsaw was made up of Jewish people. And even more generous estimations say that up to half of the citizens of Warsaw before the war were Jewish people. So in a way, Warsaw was as much a city for Polish people as well as for the Jewish people. Yeah, it was very much a city of the Jewish people. And that is something that the president of Warsaw, which is basically the equivalent of mayor, has really stressed in his speech today. He said that the Jewish way of life, even though many Jewish people have died during World War II in the ghetto and in the death camps, the Jewish way of life lives inside of every single citizen of Warsaw, because elements of Yiddish, the Jewish language, have entered Polish language. Elements of Polish cuisine have entered, element of Jewish cuisine have entered Polish food. That when a Polish person is abroad and cannot find any Polish restaurant, the first equivalent that the Polish person will go to will be a Jewish restaurant, because the tastes are basically the same, you know? And there are, of course, many institutions in Warsaw that reflect the fact, like the Jewish cemetery, which is, as you can see, pretty big. The Jewish theater, which is a wonderful theater, by the way. As you can see, this was not a very big area. In that area, about 400,000 people were cramped. And at first thing that the Germans did was to take the things that the Jewish people owned. They took poor people from different parts of Europe and Poland and crammed them into this area. So they were people that have found themselves in the ghetto without anything: money, food, a place to live. And also, the Germans have limited the amount of money that Jewish people could have in their bank, the amount of money that the Jewish people could withdraw from the bank. There were very small numbers, and this basically choked out the businesses of the Jewish people. It destroyed people. And because there were so many people in such a small area, 400,000 people, because so many people found themselves without the means to live, especially the poorest people, I read estimations that about 100,000 people died within the 2 years of establishing the ghetto from starvation. That's right. That was part of the genocide. And it led to 100,000 people dying of starvation in the ghetto within the first 2 years. And since the ghetto was created in 1940, and within the first 2 years so many people have died, that is the estimate that I have read in a few places. That is the estimate I'm pretty sure I saw during today's exhibition. So it was basically before 1943. So that basically puts to bed the notion that the genocide started in 1943. Okay? There were a lot of other problems that the people of the ghetto faced in their everyday life. There was a problem of education. Education was, of course, forbidden. Education had to be done illegally. Libraries were liquidated. Teaching was forbidden. But, just like in broader Warsaw, people thought about the future. In people's minds, this nightmare would sooner or later end. So people looked into the future and thought to themselves, if we don't do anything, we might end up with a whole generation of illiterate people on our hands, and we do not want that. So the people of the ghetto organized illegal teachings. They were people that lived in the ghetto before the ghetto was walled off. Those fortunate people continued to just live in their own apartments. Those were the lucky people. And they have shared their own libraries, give access to books. People who were teachers shared their books with others in order to organize the teaching for the children. But there was a huge, huge problem. A problem that was very difficult to solve. It was almost impossible to solve Behold, the city area surrounded by the ghetto wall was very small, very cramped, and it had little to no nature in it. And so there were little children who didn't know what a lake was. They didn't know what a garden was. They didn't know sometimes even what a flower was. And it was extremely hard to explain these concepts to the kids. There was a thing called nature deprivation at play, where the children never experienced basic things of nature, but there was a huge difficulty of explaining those things to them in a way that they could visualize it in their mind. That was a huge, huge problem. There are even whole songs. Like, how do I explain to the 3-year-old what a flower is? How do I explain what many other nature-related things are? We enter now 1943, the year in which the liquidation of the ghetto was decided, and people started being rounded up into the so-called Umschlagplatz, from which people were taken to the death camps. We're going to take a look at the Umschlagplatz. The Umschlagplatz. The place from which people were taken to the trains in order to be taken to the death camps. And keep in mind, there were many people that were forcefully rounded up to the Umschlagplatz, but there were also situations in which people came to the Umschlagplatz in order to sign up for the so-called trip on their own volition, because people were so desperate, people were so hungry, and the Nazis were giving out scraps of food at the Umschlagplatz. So there were people that went to sign up for the trip in order to get that food to fight off the starvation. And of course, the trip was also framed as the Jewish people getting a job. And of course, I should have mentioned before that Jewish people within the ghetto were used as slave labor and the so-called shops. And at first, of course, people did not really believe what was happening. They didn't realize the nature of the trips. And once people actually caught on to what was happening, about 50 or 60,000 people were left within the ghetto. And they have decided that they would fight rather than allow themselves to just be taken and killed. And so they decided to arm themselves and to launch an uprising. An uprising that was doomed to fail. But it was not about winning. It was about dying with dignity. It was about dying while fighting. There were two aspects to this. There were actually many, many aspects to people defying their fate. There is a very powerful element to it which teaches us about what we can do in face of hatred. For example, people in the ghetto organized and grew, or at least tried to grow their own food. Even places like the Jewish cemetery were used to grow crops, grow food. People also build special bunkers that were usually under basements, because not everybody in the ghetto took part in the uprising as fighters. Whole families were hiding in the so-called bunkers built by very talented people that would plan out and build those bunkers. And of course, some people lived there for a long time without ever going outside in a dark, damp room dug up under a basement. There's one still living person from that time that have lived in a bunker for 9 months. And she tells in her testimony, do not expect me to give you any emotional recollections of what happened back then. I was very small. I was 9 years old. I was somewhat outside of all of those events. I didn't fully understand all of them. I didn't fully grasp all of them. I operated mostly on instinct. When things got extremely hot, I knew that I had to escape to where it was colder. When things got very cold, I knew I had to escape to where the warmth is. I do live in Warsaw, yes. And my great-grandfather was in fact shot in the ghetto. My family from my mother's side had a business that was somewhere, I have to locate the street, somewhere around here. Yes, I do live in Warsaw because I've also grown up in the area where the ghetto was. And many, well, maybe not that many, but there are still remains of the ghetto wall near the place where I grew up. Some buildings that were part of the ghetto. Those things were like part of my childhood. So unfortunately, as we know, the uprising was doomed to fail. And so it did. And the ghetto was burned. It was burned building by building. And the people hiding in the bunkers lived in constant fear of getting caught, in constant fear of being executed. And so it all ended, which was the topic of the exhibition All Around Us, a Sea of Fire, which I will share with every one of you very soon, especially since the exhibition was both in Polish as well as in English. So all of the powerful quotes, all of the powerful descriptions are available in English. I have photographed them and I will share them with you all. So here we are right now. We entered today's 80th anniversary of those historical events. And I think the most important thing that I will share with you today, because all the other speeches I will actually upload on the channel with subtitles if needed. I will check their audio and I will give a small commentary to those. But today, I think we will focus on the speech. I'm not sure. My great-grandfather died in the ghetto shot. My grandmother's brother, he survived the ghetto and died during the Warsaw uprising that took part 1 year later. Because 1 year later, in 1944, the Warsaw uprising happened, and many people that fought in the ghetto uprising went on to fight in the Warsaw uprising. My grandmother, of course, survived, and my great-grandmother, I'm not sure how. My information on them is very, very limited. My grandfathers and grandmothers from my mom's side family was very secretive about those things. My grandfather and grandmother from my mom's side never spoke much about the war or what happened then. They were the sort of people that just always lived in the now. My grandmother died in the year 1977, from lung cancer. And that was when my mom was fairly young herself. She was like 20 at the time. So I never knew my grandmother from my mother's side. And my grandfather from my mom's side, who was a professor of law, he never actually did any sort of reminiscing of the past. I don't think I've ever heard him say the cliche phrase, in my time. His time was always now. He always lived in the now. He didn't really look to the past for some days of glory or something like that. His days of glory were always right now. When it comes to my grandfather, the only time when he sort of did some thinking about the past or telling me about the past is when he told me about the times from before the war. And it wasn't about the times themselves. He was telling me more about the little habits that he had with his father, how they used to go to a walk, and then they would take a boat ride through the Vistula River, and then they would go to dinner. And then he told me some prices of items before World War II, but that's basically it. They were very secretive about the events of the war itself. They were not open about it at all. So we go to the speech of Marian Turski, the very famous person. We have covered one of his speeches in the past. The speech was called The 11th Commandment, Do Not Be Indifferent. And today, once again, Marian Turski, the survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau, took the stage and said, I feel duty-bound to reiterate this call. People, do not be indifferent to evil. And this is a broader message. This is a broader message of not being indifferent to evil, whether it be the evil of the anti-LGBT movements, the evils of Russia invading Ukraine, or the evils of how the state of Israel treats people in Palestine. Right? Do not be indifferent to evil. To those who spread hate, because Auschwitz survivor and historian Marian Turski said during the official commemorations on the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, we must stand against anti-Semitism, human rights violations, attacks on the neighboring countries, falsification of history, and lack of respect for the interest and will of minorities. Turski stressed. It's very important. The main part of the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising was held at noon in front of the monument to the ghetto heroes in Warsaw. The ceremony was commenced with the sound of sirens blaring across the city of Warsaw, followed shortly by the national anthem of Poland. This is Marian Turski. Leaders and ordinary citizens marked the heroism of those who took part in the largest Jewish uprising against Nazi Germany during World War II. Auschwitz survivor and historian Marian Turski was among the speakers during the ceremony. He reminded that he had been liberated from the death camp by the Soviet army, consisting mainly of Russian soldiers. My gratitude to them, to those who liberated me from German camps, will stay with me until the very last day of my life, he said. Should I be silent and indifferent? But should I be indifferent? Should I be silent when today Russian forces attack a neighboring country and take over its lands? Should I be silent when Russian missiles destroy Ukrainian infrastructure, homes, hospitals, culture heritage, and cause a rapid increase in death rate and lower life expectancy of hundreds of thousands of civilians? Should I be silent when I see the fate of Bucha, knowing how the Germans had annihilated Polish Mnichów, Belarusian Katyń? Turski asked rhetorically. He also quoted works of Marek Edelman, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. The most important thing is life. And when there is life, the most important thing is freedom. And then we give our lives for freedom, and one doesn't know anymore what is most important. People, do not be indifferent to evil. 125 years ago, in response to the anti-Semitic Dreyfus affair, Emil Zola cried out, "Accuse, I accuse you." Marian, Turski said. This cry by Emil Zola shook France and to some extent Europe. I am deeply convinced that today, here in Warsaw, we should repeat this call. I accuse you. We must stand against anti-Semitism, human rights violations, attacks on neighboring countries, falsifications of history, and lack of respect for the interest and will of minorities. He underscored. I feel duty-bound to reiterate this call. People, do not be indifferent to evil. Do not be indifferent to evil. People, stay alert. It is very easy to gain followers with hate, but will not bring about the downfall to me, you, them, our children and grandchildren. That is why I say to those who spread hate, I accuse you. The former Auschwitz prisoner stressed. And we can see it right now. You can see many examples of people that gain following through hate. You know what? I propose to you something on social media, and you can share this proposition. You can share this idea with others. This little idea that I thought of. I accuse you. Whenever you see someone spreading hate, whenever you are bombarded with posts from people like Matt Walsh or any other person that gains a following through hate, or any other people that try to spread hate, like the pro-Russian shells that want to talk about Ukraine being conquered, why not simply respond to them by saying, I accuse you? I think that is a thing that we could spread around. Whenever we see something like that happening, we can all collectively respond to them with these words. I accuse you. We can use the French quote followed by the English one. I accuse you. And I think that if we spread this far and wide, we could turn this into a broader sort of thing that we can do across the social media to combat hate. This simple message, I accuse you. What do you think? Can we do it? It might not be big at first. We could even turn it into a hashtag, potentially. I accuse you. The I accuse you hashtag. I think we should do it. Anytime a Ben Shapiro rears his ugly head, or a Matt Walsh or any other hateful person, respond to them with, I accuse you. Yeah, and I think we should be telling people that. We don't need to argue with them. We don't need to really say anything. All we need is this phrase, I accuse you. That is all that we need. And we do know the history of it. We know what it signifies. We can do it. Thank you.